You didn't see it happen? That's the thing that makes it so strange when you look back. One day the role existed. People held it. Some of them had held it for 20 years. They had a desk, a login, a routine. They knew the software. They knew the process. And then, not with a dramatic announcement, not with a headline, the role just quietly stopped being filled. No one fired those workers. The company simply stopped hiring their replacements. This is how AI is actually taking jobs in 2026. Not loudly, not the way science fiction promised, not robots walking into offices and escorting humans out. It happens in the gap between one person leaving and the next person never arriving. Economists have a name for this. They call it labor displacement through attrition. The job doesn't get eliminated, it gets quietly retired while everyone is looking somewhere else. And the job it happened to first, the one that vanished before anyone had time to name what was happening, was probably closer to your paycheck than you think. Let's go back to 2022 for a moment. That was the year the first generation of large language models became capable enough to handle what researchers at MIT called cognitive routine tasks. A cognitive routine task sounds technical, but it just means any mental job that follows a repeatable pattern. Reading a document and summarizing it, answering a question using a knowledge base, sorting information into categories, flagging something that didn't match a rule. That description fits an enormous number of jobs. And in 2022, those jobs employed tens of millions of people across the developed world. The researchers at MIT, Darren Acemoglu and David Autor, two of the most cited labor economists alive, had been studying this pattern for over a decade before AI arrived. They had watched it happen with earlier waves of automation. Acemoglu published research showing that when a new technology automates a category of task, it doesn't immediately destroy the job titles attached to that task. Instead, it shrinks the headcount slowly. Each year, fewer new hires. Each year, a little more of the work rerouted to software. The income attached to that skill doesn't vanish overnight. It erodes like a coastline. Here's what that looks like in practice. You are a financial analyst at a mid-sized company. Your job is to pull quarterly reports, build summaries, flag anomalies, and send a digest to the team. In 2021, your company has 4 people doing this. In 2023, one of them leaves for another job. The company doesn't replace her. An AI tool handles her portion of the workflow. In 2024, a second person leaves. Same thing. By 2025, 2 people are doing the work that 4 people did. Not because they became twice as productive through effort, but because the parts of the job that could be automated quietly were. By 2026, the company posts a job listing for 1 analyst, not 2, and the salary offered is lower because the role has been redefined around what AI cannot yet do, which is worth less on the market. No one was fired, but 2 jobs disappeared. This is the story playing out across financial services, legal support, insurance, healthcare administration, customer support, and dozens of other industries right now. The common thread is not the industry. The common thread is the type of work. David Autor's research, updated as recently as 2025, identifies what he calls the middle skill compression. The jobs most at risk are not at the top and not at the bottom. They are the ones in the middle, the ones requiring enough cognitive skill to pay a decent salary, but not enough creative or social judgment to be hard to automate. In other words, the jobs that felt safe. These were not the jobs people worried about in the early days of automation anxiety. When robots entered factories in the 1980s, everyone could see the threat clearly. A machine was replacing a physical action. A welding robot replaced a welder. The cause and effect were visible. That visibility gave workers and unions and policymakers something to respond to. The cognitive displacement happening now is different. It is invisible in a way that makes it nearly impossible to organize around or even grieve properly. When a welding job disappears, the welder knows. When a document review job disappears, the people who would have held that job just never get hired. They apply. They don't hear back. They adjust their expectations. They blame themselves. They assume the problem is their resume, or their interview skills, or the economy in general, rather than understanding that the specific category of work they were trained for has been quietly absorbed by software. And here's where your money enters the picture. If you have been wondering why your salary feels stagnant, even though the job market technically looks functional, this is part of the answer. Wage growth in mid-skill cognitive roles has slowed dramatically since 2023. A report from the McKinsey Global Institute published in late 2024 found that real wages, and wages adjusted for inflation, in roles classified as routine cognitive, fell by an average of 6% between 2022 and 2024. Not because those workers became less skilled, because the supply of humans willing to do that work now competes directly with software that does it for a fraction of the cost. You're not competing with a worker in another country anymore. You're competing with a model that runs on a server and never takes a lunch break. So what do you actually do with this information? The first thing most people reach for is reskilling. Learn to code. Learn to use AI tools. Become the person who manages the AI rather than the person it replaces. This is real advice. It is not wrong, but it is also incomplete in a way that financial commentators rarely acknowledge, because reskilling costs money and time that not everyone has in equal measure, and because the skills that feel safe today may not feel safe in 3 years. Aksamoglu himself has raised this concern publicly. In a 2024 lecture at Harvard, he warned against what he called reskilling optimism, the assumption that the labor market will naturally absorb displaced workers into new high-skill roles at the same rate that AI eliminates the mid-skill ones. Historically, he argues, this reabsorption takes decades, and during those decades, real people experience real income losses that reshape their lives and their financial trajectories in ways that compound over time, just like debt does. This is the part of the AI and jobs conversation that almost never appears in personal finance content, because it is not actionable in a clean, 3-step way. It is structural, it is slow, and it is already happening to people who do not yet have the language to describe what is occurring. But there's something you can do right now that is not reskilling, not hustle culture advice, and not generic emergency fund wisdom. You can audit your own income for displacement risk. Look at your job. Break it into its actual components. Not the title, not the department, but the tasks. Write them down. For each task, ask one question. Could this be accomplished by a language model or automation tool available today with a human checking the output? If the answer is yes for more than half of what fills your day, your income is exposed to attrition risk over the next 3 to 5 years, not certain displacement, but exposure. This audit is not about panic. It is about the same thing every good financial decision is about: understanding your actual position before you need to react to it. The workers who navigated previous waves of automation best were not the ones who were most talented. They were the ones who saw the pattern early, while they still had time and income to adapt on their own terms, rather than under duress after the job was already gone. The quiet displacement is already underway. The job AI killed first did not make the news because no single person was fired. But somewhere in the aggregate of hiring data and wage reports and unanswered job applications, the shape of it is visible if you know where to look. You did not see it happen, but now you know how to see what comes next.